We talk fan reaction to Pierre-Luc Dubois' comments about his time in LA and more on this edition of Locked On LA King.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love for you to leave us a positive comment on Apple Podcasts if you're a fan of the show, and we're on YouTube. Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years, 20 plus years at the Fox Sports Radio Network. I'm also co-host of the Puck Podcast, a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the last 18 years, and a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. Today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. Start hiring now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/lockedon. Well, the LA Kings rookie faceoff got underway on Friday. I was out there in El Segundo to check it out. It continues through Monday, and the Kings are playing the Utah Hockey Club on Saturday at 7 p.m., and they conclude the event with a game at 3 p.m. on Monday, 3:30 p.m. on Monday against the Anaheim Ducks. You can watch all of the games, no matter where you are, streaming on lakings.com. We're going to have a full report on the rookie faceoff coming up next week. But for this show, it is a Friday. That means it is usually a Kings fan feedback show, and that is what we have for you today. So let's get right into it. Our first email comes from John. He is in Valencia, and he's talking about, in part, the Pierre-Luc Dubois interview. He says, this PLD interview is very concerning. It's obvious we have a disconnect as coaching and management as a group. As you stated, we were bringing in a problem child, and there should have been a lot of attention to him. Sit down and define his role with McClellan, Blake, and Luke should have been one of the first things done. I believe this is the reason why McClellan has not been successful in the NHL, and I believe Blake was afraid to confront McClellan concerning player decisions. As for PLD himself, he recognizes his issues, yet he doesn't open up dialogue with McClellan or Blake on what should be done. I'm not buying that he's so naive. He needed to sit down and demand to discuss what his role was going to be as the second highest paid player on the team. I'd love to see a response from Blake on PLD's comments and what he has plans to do to change this practice, but we'll never see that, I'm sure. As for Vladislav Gavrikov, we cannot make the same mistake as last year with Matt Roy. Playoffs or not, if there's a solid offer for Gavrikov, we need to take it. He's making $5.875 million, and I don't believe he has lived up anywhere near his salary. And again, that was in part from John in Valencia. We do have some more emails coming up about the Pierre-Luc Dubois comments, so I'm going to save my comments about that for a couple minutes from now. I will to say about Gavrikov. I don't think 5.8 million is out of line for a solid second pairing defenseman, which is what he is. The Capitals just gave Matt Roy 5.7 million per year, and he plays a similar type role. Defensive defenseman, doesn't provide too much offensively. So I'm not, looking at Gavrikov's contract and saying, oh, we got to get out from under that, or we can't, pay him something similar going forward. I would be okay if the Kings re-signed him on a short-term deal for a similar number going forward. But if he's looking to go elsewhere and doesn't want to accept what the Kings have to offer, if he's looking for more, if he's looking for any kind of significant raise, which I can't imagine he would be, but you never know, then yes, for sure, the Kings need to trade him at the deadline, regardless of what the situation is as far as where they are in the playoff standings. Even if they feel it might weaken the team at in the moment, you cannot afford to let another player walk away for nothing. Now, I think the situation is a bit different. Matt Roy was finally getting a chance to test free agency for the first time, and this was his big opportunity to probably get the biggest contract of his career, and he had to take that opportunity. Not quite the same with Vladislav Gavrikov. I don't know that he would be quite as in demand as Matt Roy, but we'll see. So I do think he could be open to re-signing with the Kings. But again, if he's not willing, then they definitely need to trade him. I will also say, John, I did see, and John sent a very detailed and lengthy email. I did have to cut it down for time purposes, but he did give a big kind of a description or his lineup for the Kings, what he thought the line should be. And I will say, John, I'll just say this regarding that. I do agree with you that I think Quentin Byfield should start out the year as the second line center. And I agree with you that I think Brant Clark should start out the year as on the second pairing. I think those two guys are the future. Let's go ahead and get them into those roles of responsibility right away and have them go from there. I know I'm not a big believer in babying someone into the lineup. I think they're both talented enough to be able to accept the responsibility, and I'm okay with them learning on the job a bit. I'm okay with going through the growing pains at the beginning of the year so that they can be further along at the end of the year. Our next email comes from Omar, and he is in Pomona. Omar in Pomona. He says, I'm an everyday listener, and I can't get enough of your podcast. I listen to it every morning. Thank you, Omar. He says, I have to say, after hearing Pierre-Luc Dubois' comments and thoroughly thinking it through the situation, I honestly can't be upset with what he said. I do agree with you that he is a professional. He needs to take the initiative, but seeing how inconsistent and clueless this organization is, I can't help but somewhat agree with PLD. Rob Blake himself doesn't even know what he's doing, nor did McClellan really. We've seen time and time that Blake says we're close to our goal, yet he himself doesn't know what he means by that. I love this organization, but also do my best to see both perspectives. Thoughts? And again, that was from Omar in Pomona. I would say it's a little bit harsh to say that Blake doesn't know what he's doing, but it is very fair to say that the situation with Pierre-Luc Dubois was not handled properly. I think that even Todd McClellan, I think, did an okay job. The problem was, specifically with Pierre-Luc Dubois, he was a huge gamble, and he came with baggage, and there was a lot of smoke around him, and everybody knew it. So for everything not to be put out in the open, specifically and clearly defined and addressed the situation, where he was going to play, what was expected, all that, for them to seemingly not do that. And again, Pierre-Luc Dubois' comments seem to back up the fact that that wasn't the case, to me is crazy, especially when you give up the assets you gave up to get him, and then you sign him to the deal you sign him to for the term, for the length of the contract and how much money you're paying him. Like, you have to turn over every stone in that situation, especially with that kind of a guy. And they didn't seem to do it. And that's crazy. That's crazy. And it taints everything that Rob Blake has done, all the good things he has done. And the same for Tom McClellan. Them not being able to make that work affects, how you view them and the job that they have done overall. That move was that big, and the failure was that big that's the case. So, yeah, obviously that, like I said, that trade didn't work out. We all know that, and there's blame to go around everywhere. Brian in Los Alamitos checks in, and he says, I heard Monday's show, and I actually appreciate PLD's comments regarding his time in LA. He took partial responsibility for why it didn't work out with the Kings, but also put some of the blame on Blake and McClellan. Personally, I place most of the blame on Rob Blake. As the GM, he should know everything there is to know about the player he's acquiring, what PLD would need to succeed, and a plan on how he would be used within the lineup. Instead, it's like Blake was putting together a fantasy hockey team and just acquired players based on stats and profiles. It makes me wonder if Blake has laid out a specific path to success for the team to follow, or is the plan simply to win the Stanley Cup? As at the very least, I hope Kings ownership has started to do a preliminary research to potentially find a new candidate to step in and replace Rob Blake and possibly Luke Robitaille as president. On another note, I was wondering about Martin Chromiak. At one point, I thought he was considered one of the Kings' better offensive prospects, but I haven't heard much about him lately. Have you? Thanks for another great week of shows. Go Kings. And that is from Brian in Los Alamitos. Well, I'll just say I totally agree with what you said. It echoes the things that I said about what the Kings should have done, Rob Blake should have done in regards to Pierre-Luc Dubois and what they needed to do to make it work and how to make it work. And it didn't seem like that was the case. As for Martin Kromiak, he just turned 22. He has played 2 years in the AHL, 15 goals and 28 points 2 years ago, 15 goals, 32 points last season, although he did play in 15 more games last year than he did the previous year. So as far as his age goes, I don't think this is any kind of a make or break season for him. He's still young enough that he's got some time to still develop, I think. That said, I do think the Kings would look at him and say, we expect to see progress this year. Again, I don't think it's, he's got to do it this year or they're going to cut bait on him or anything like that. But I do I think they expect to see some progress from him now going into his third year of hockey with the Ontario Reign. So I think Martin Kromiak is still in the plans. Maybe it's taken a little bit longer for him to kind of get into it as far as making a jump from his first year of pro hockey to his second year. But I think, like I said, I think the Kings are looking for more this year, and hopefully we'll see more this year. But again, he's still young. There's still time. I don't think there's any reason to say this, like I said, that this is a make or break year for him, but he needs to show more. Up next, we're going to solve a mystery from last week's fan feedback show. That's next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Drive, passion, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you will always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it is easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home the win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay's Guarantee Fit only available to U.S. customers. All right, on our last fan feedback show, we had an email from Henry in Spokane, Washington, who talked about meeting up with the CDA Kings fans. And I mentioned that I didn't know what that meant. Well, we had several people chime in. Gary, Dave, Thomas all said CDA is in reference to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And we have several Kings fans that watch and listen to the show there. And so that is what he was talking about. Gary also added that Spokane, Washington is about half an hour from Coeur d'Alene. And that Coeur d'Alene is referred to as CDA a lot. Thomas, who is in Coeur d'Alene, also added this: Spokane and Coeur d'Alene are about as far apart as Santa Clarita and the San Fernando Valley, to put it in perspective. So a lot of us have a crossover connection. The only difference is that you have to go from Idaho to Washington and back and forth across the state line. But it's just like any other town that's right next to each other. I'd be happy to meet up with other Kings fans in the area and maybe even plan a trip to Seattle or Vancouver. On another note, what do you think the chances are that Arthur Kaliyev will not sign a contract and will just be scratched? I thought we would see some movement by now, but it's clear that the relationship between Artie and the Kings is completely soured. I also wonder why he seems to be someone that no team will touch. It has to be something that we are just all not aware of that has to do with his attitude or other off-ice issues, right? Anyway, look forward to the show this week and look forward to hockey season starting up. And again, that was from Thomas in CDA. So I did a show, I think it was last week, talking about specifically why it didn't seem that Arthur Kaliyev was in demand by any team, or at least whatever the price was that the Kings were looking for. Other teams were like, nah, we're good. From what I have heard, the Kings have offered him a contract and he has yet to sign it. Now, maybe he's going to wait till the last second and then report to camp just to kind of show his displeasure. But again, if he wants to play in the NHL next season, it's going to be almost certainly for the LA Kings. Now, he could sign the contract and they could still trade him. But I think if that was going to be the case, I think they would have done it by now. It is still an option going forward, but again, if he doesn't have really any options here. If he wants to play in the NHL, he's going to have to sign that contract and then see what happens. And maybe in this kind of I don't want to call it a no-win situation, but in this situation where he just doesn't have a lot of options, his best option is to play well for the Kings and drive up his trade value if he still wants out. There is still the option of him going overseas, playing in the KHL, playing in Switzerland, something like that. But again, if he wants to play in the best league in the world, probably going to have to be with the LA Kings. So we'll see. Training camp comes up this Wednesday. Our next email comes from Kyle. He's in Salt Lake City. He says, I just wanted to hear your thoughts on maintaining loyalty towards a sports team that you are no longer local to. You've mentioned in previous shows how you're a Steelers fan, but you seem to follow the Chargers as your wife is a fan. How has your opinion on being a fan of the Steelers while living in Cali changed over the years? It's easy to say now that the Kings will always have my heart, but living only a block away from where the Utah Hockey Club will play, it's hard not to have a lot of hype for the future over there, especially considering how bright their future is, with how much cap space they have and all the draft picks that they have. Outside of my excitement to see how players like Byfield and Clark look next year, it's hard to be too optimistic for the Kings' future with Kopi and Doughty on the way out, especially considering the fan base current sentiments towards the franchise under Blake's tenure. I'll be wearing my number 11 Kings jersey at the preseason game here in a couple of weeks, and again when they play here later into the regular season. I'm just hoping I have the bandwidth to follow both teams as closely as I kept up with the Kings in the past. Love the show, and I really appreciate and respect your professionalism and realistic view on the Kings, and excited for this next year of hockey. Go Kings, go. And that's Kyle in Salt Lake City, Utah. Well, Kyle, it's a good question. And I can understand the dilemma you find yourself in. I think it's a dilemma that a lot of Kings fans who lived in Las Vegas found themselves in when the Golden Knights came to town, and especially after the exciting first season they had. But I was not born in California. I was born in Hawaii. But I was raised in California, in Central California, and then eventually moved to LA. But I've always been a Steelers fan living in California. So me not being close to proximity to them hasn't affected me as a fan. As a matter of fact, I've become a bigger fan as the years have gone along because of satellite TV and the internet, and it's easy to follow a team that's that far away, as if they were down the street, except, seeing them obviously in person. As far as, being a kind of a Chargers fan, I root for them because we go to all the games and I've become familiar with the team, and there's no real rivalry between the Steelers and the Chargers. They play each other occasionally. They're playing each other week after next, and we're going to the game in Pittsburgh. But I've never not been a Steelers fan, so I don't have any divided loyalties. I want the Chargers to do well because I like to see my wife happy, and because they've never won much of anything. It's easy to kind of root for the underdog. I'm one of those guys who doesn't mind rooting for the underdog, and they've been kind of an underdog franchise. Yeah, from that, I'm not in your boat. I understand your situation, and I would even understand if you decided to switch teams. You've got an NHL team suddenly in your town, and as you said, right by where you live. So, and I know there's a lot of excitement about the franchise now that it's got new ownership. And as you mentioned, they've got a lot of draft picks. They've got a lot of cap space. They've got a lot of young talent. So I get it. I mean, if you decided to leave the Kings and go to the Utah hockey team, I wouldn't chastise you over that. I wouldn't say you're a turncoat or a traitor. You kind of found yourself in a situation that you probably just a year ago never dreamed you would be in. Hockey in Salt Lake City didn't seem like really a reality to me. And then suddenly, boom, it happens, and there you go. So I hope you stay a Kings fan. I hope you keep watching this show. I would say the Kings should be your wife, but you can have a girlfriend on the side. And of course, just in a sports sense, I'm not condoning cheating on your wife. But that's something that I think is realistic. Follow the Salt Lake City team, enjoy going to the games. But hopefully when the Kings come to town, you're a Kings fan again, and they'll be your number one team. But I totally understand the dilemma you find yourself in. This new exciting thing has just moved next door, and you're like, wow, this it's hard not to get swept up in this. But Like I said, I wouldn't blame you if you decided to become a Utah Hockey Club fan. I hope you won't, but if you do, I get it. I really do. But I would say if you can, at least try to be fans of both. See how it works out for you. One quick email. This is from Jan. Did not say where he or she is from, so don't know that. But he or she said, "Are the Kings prepared to trade Vladislav Gavrikov? The additions of Burrows, Edmondson, Jones, plus England, Krieger, and Moverar on the roster means they have the depth to do it." So we touched on this a little bit already about Gavrikov. Are they preparing to trade him? Possibly. If he doesn't want to resign at a reasonable price, I think they will and should trade him at the trade deadline. As far as any of the names that you mentioned, I mean, there obviously are defensemen in the system of the organization that they will plug in if they don't go out and get somebody. But none of the guys you named are as good of a defenseman as Vladislav Gavrikov. This isn't a situation where Matt Roy leaves and we have a Brant Clark to plug in. And even though Brant Clark initially won't be as good as Matt Roy, eventually he will be better than Matt Roy. So I don't know that there's certainly none of the names you named, I don't believe, are that kind of a player. So yeah, as it stands right now, I don't think there's anybody in the Kings system at this point that you would recognize and say, "Oh, it's okay if we trade Gavrikov because we've got this guy ready to go the following year." So I would say from that list, I don't think there's anybody on that list that would fill the shoes of Vladislav Gavrikov, as Brant Clark will do, or Jordan Spence will do with Matt Roy's departure this coming season. Up next, we're going to talk a little bit Kings uniforms and more on this edition of Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. No matter how the last game went, anytime you take the field, you've got a shot at greatness. Give your team the best shot at winning and recruiting more MVPs with Indeed, because Indeed is the hiring partner where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. And Indeed is the only job site where you're guaranteed to find quality applications that meet your must-have requirements, or else you don't pay. Indeed partners with you on every step of the hiring process. Find great talent through time-saving tools like Indeed Instant Match assessments and virtual interviews. With Indeed Match, Instant Match, as soon as you sponsor a post, you get a short list of qualified candidates whose resumes on Indeed match your job description, and you can invite them to apply right away. Plus, you only pay for quality applications that meet your must-have requirements. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your job more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. All right, we got a few more emails before we wrap up this week's show. This from Andy in Pico Rivera, and he says, "I became a Kings fan 2 years ago, and I've been a daily listener ever since. Thank you for your daily content and helping us stay connected with our Kings." You're welcome. Thank you for listening and watching. With the 131 getting so much attention recently and not so much positive, I'd like to know, is there a system you prefer the Kings play? And with the Kings having a good mix of offense and defensive players, would they be able to switch between systems with different players on the ice so that they can maximize their offensive output for players like Fiala, Kempe, and Brant Clark? Keep up the good work, and thank you again for what you do. And thank you, Andy in Pico Rivera, for checking in. I don't know that the 131 got a lot of attention. I don't know, though, that it got a lot of negative attention. It did from some opponents, which to me is a compliment. I like when the other team says they don't like playing against us. But I think the Kings are going to move off of it. I'm not exactly sure what we're going to see from him. That's certainly one of the things we're all curious to see when it comes to Jim Hiller. I think the 131, the issue with it is that it's passive, right? You've got three guys across in the neutral zone, and you're forcing the other team to dump it in, right? You're preventing them from carrying the puck into the zone. You've got to make them dump it in and go get it and then work for it. So, but I think the Kings were looking for and are going to be looking to go more towards a system where it's a little more proactive. It's a little more in your face, right? It's not so much sit back and try and go through this wall. It's about us, our team, getting in on you and creating turnovers and forcing things like that. So I think that's what the Kings are looking to do, and hope that they can create more offense by playing a more aggressive style. Um, and we have this from Keith. I think he officially said that he is in parts unknown. He wants to be mysterious. He says, on the subject of the new jerseys for the LA Kings, I have to say it's a bit hit and miss on them. I'm glad they stuck with the silver, black, and white as their colors, as I think this is more of the LA Kings brand than Forum blue and gold. I do like the base jersey, although the neckline could use some tweaking. I wish they would have kept the numbers and nameplate font used most recently, and this would have been a nice transition from the previous iteration of the Kings. The updated crown is excellent and should have been the crest patch used on the front of the jersey as their primary design. As for the sparkly, shimmery silver, I wish they'd have gone with a flat silver, almost gray. There's a fine line between Raiders and Liberace. The jersey with the new crown, new striping, and recent number lettering would have been a collection of all of these phases of the Kings' history. The crown representing the beginning of the franchise, the striping representing the Gretzky era, and the numbering lettering of the Stanley Cup years. I think that's well thought out and well said, Keith, to be honest with you. And Keith did actually include a picture of a jersey design he would have liked to have seen. So if you're watching on the YouTube show, you'll get a little treat here. And if you're not, if you're listening on the podcast, I'll try and explain it to you. But I'm going to show it. This is from Keith, and here's a design that he had, and kind of what he was talking about. And Keith, I got to be honest with you, I love it. I've always thought the crown should be the primary logo for the Kings, although you and I will disagree on the Forum blue and gold. I don't mind the black and the silver and the white. But if you're listening, if you're not seeing this, basically the old crown design is what Keith has as the primary color, but he just has it in the black, silver, and white jerseys. I think it looks great. I absolutely would love to see this design. Keith, I think you hit a home run with this. And I actually had very similar thoughts as well. If you're watching on YouTube, you just saw the jersey, but the crown logo I have currently on my hat and the jersey I'm wearing is the old school crown. And seeing that in the black and white, I think would be a great mix. I did see the Kings jerseys up close and personal at the rookie face-off today. And the stripe at the bottom of the jersey is really wide. Russell Morgan, friend of the show from Hockey Royalty, said you could land a plane on that stripe. I agree with him. It's a little bit much. I think it would be better if it was not quite so wide. Jesse Cohen from the All the Kingsmen podcast did not like the collar around the Kings jersey, which is they were wearing their black jerseys. The collar is white. I don't have a problem with that at all. It didn't bother me, but some people have said they didn't really care for that. All right, we've got to our final email. It is from Ed, formerly Edwin in Brea, who I saw out at the rookie face-off on Friday night. He says, I'm writing this on Adrian Kempe's birthday. Happy birthday. And also, it was 9/11 this week, and the Kings organization, of course, lost two members that day, Ace and Mark. Sad day then, and we still remember. Well said. He says, now to my point. First off, about PLD. I heard his comments, and all I have to say is I understand that it can be challenging to move to a new team, new coach, etc. I will say, despite that, PLD should have produced better, and the Kings management should not have given him $8.5 million per year. A player of that value should be able to produce no matter what team he's on or who the coach is, and PLD is not that player. If PLD was making $5 million or less, I could see his viewpoint. However, if you're making that much money, like a Sidney Crosby, you have to produce. So I see that it goes both ways. However, I will say it's more on GM Rob Blake and Robitaille giving him that money and putting him in that situation. Hopefully they corrected that mistake by trading him away for goalie Darcy Kemper, which I like, and head coach Jim Hiller, who I'm optimistic about. I see this team for the season with the roster that they've built as a puck possession team, since we have no elite offensive talent. And as of now, I have us as a bubble playoff team. I will say we need Kempe and Fiala and one other King, either Moore or Byfield, to reach 30 goals. I will just say about that, Edwin, or Ed, I think Kem Fiala is an elite offensive talent. I really do. And I think Kempe and maybe Byfield in the near future are right there. So I'm not quite as down on our offensive talent as maybe you are. But I think your point is taken. I would agree with you that Kempe, Fiala, and at least one other player need to be 30 goals or more this year for the Kings to be able to obviously produce enough offense because right, we'll see. They're not going to be the most offensively talented team in the league, although we haven't really seen that much over the last few years as far as having a top 10 goal scorer or something like that, a top 10 point producer, and the Kings have still made the playoff series in a row. So there's that. Thank you to everyone who took the time to email. Really appreciate it. Obviously, this show is not possible without your participation. So thank you. If you want to email for a future show, the email address is lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE. For you everydayers, we are back to 5 days a week starting next week. We've got a lot of special things planned. We have a Pacific Division roundtable show that's in the works. We've got a random Kings fan interview that is planned. We're obviously going to recap all 3 days of the rookie faceoff for the LA Kings and more. It is time to get back into hockey. Training camp starts next week, and next week we have shows Monday through Friday. We hope you will join us for all those as we are getting ready for the start of hockey season. We'd also love for you to stay interactive with the show by following us on X, Twitter, and Instagram. We are at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great weekend. We'll talk to you on Monday. And as always, go Kings, go.